Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Brown. As Karen said, I am the Student Relations Manager in the Office of the Dean of Students, and I also serve as the Campus Student Conduct and Discipline Officer. So today I am here to present on data that we collect in the Office of the Dean of Students. This is all going to be data from our student cases that we handle per year. And I'm going to give some suggestions on ways that you can make your class more student-friendly, more student accessible, based on what students themselves have told us are their issues and problems that they run into on campus. So to begin with, we are going to have a little bit of a quiz, so you do not have to unmute yourself or raise your hand. This is just a knowledge check to see if you're aware of the types of resources that we have on campus. So this is our first question, which is, does John Jay have a food pantry with free food for any student who needs it? So you can score yourself at home. This is just a true false. And the answer to this one is true. We do have a food pantry with free food for any student who needs it, no questions asked. That is in the Wellness Center. And they also have hot food, breakfast, and occasionally lunch as well. So our next question is, does John Jay have resources to put a homeless student into housing? So a student who comes and says that they're living in a shelter, do we have housing resources for them? So the answer to this one is unfortunately false. We do not have residence life or any residential resources. However, if a student does come to us, we can refer them to outside and community resources. Here's our next question. Does John Jay have free psychiatric care for students? And that includes medication prescription. And the answer to this one is actually true. The Health and Counseling Center does have a part-time psychiatrist who is paid for by the student activity fee. It's something that students are already paying for, so I do encourage students to take advantage of those kind of resources that are paid for out of their student activity fee. And here is the last question on this slide, which is, can we pay a student rent or utilities if they are receiving eviction letters or letters from the utility company that they're going to be cut off? And the answer to this one is also true. We have an emergency fund. A student can get up to $3,000 to pay for things like rent, utilities, and also tuition. That $3,000 is over the entire lifetime of a student's academic career at John Jay. Okay, so now this is just a knowledge check for you. I don't necessarily know if the answer is true or false, but do you know what to do if a student tells you that they have been sexually assaulted or are experiencing domestic violence? Again, this is just for you. This is a knowledge check for yourself to see if you know what resources are available on campus. Do you know what to do if a student tells you that a classmate is harassing them? Or if a student tells me that someone is stealing or plagiarizing their research? Do we know what to do if if you suspect a student has cheated on an exam or a major project? Or do you know what to do if a student says that the FBI has bugged their phone and email? These are all issues that are, I wouldn't say common, but you will encounter them at some point, probably during your career as a teacher. So this is why I put them in the slides. So that was a knowledge check for you folks, and now we are going to get to the data. So here is our first table. So the Dean of Students Office activity by academic year. And just to clarify, this is not student conduct cases. This is only the cases that are walk-ins from students and they're telling us the issues that they have. I've been collecting this data since 2016, and I have the data available for the 2023-2024 academic year. So you can see that we had a spike in 2019, 2020 that was driven almost entirely by the pandemic and the issues that that caused for students. However, it is noteworthy that the number of cases was already going up in 2018. And when we had that spike in 2020, it continued to rise and continues to do so. So the Dean of Students Office handles roughly 1,000 or a little bit more individual cases with students per academic year. So of note, I've broken it down a little bit further. Of note, we see that The spring semester is really the semester when things get hopping. Things are pretty quiet during the summertime as less students are on campus, and during the spring, as most seniors are getting ready to graduate, we see a spike in activity, partially driven by academic stuff, like everybody trying to get their last degree progress credits all together in order to get their diploma. And also because the Dean of Students office is within student affairs, a lot of those issues are going to be related to the commencement ceremony and various commencement activities. So that's just our raw overall numbers. We're going to start to look at the types of student inquiries on the next slide. Any questions or concerns or comments before I move forward? Okay, seeing none. These are the types of student inquiries that we get. I'm going to show you all of these on table 3, but I'm going to breeze past that and then move on to table 4 because certain issues are not really germane to faculty. Like, for example, our Residence Life program, which was discontinued, I've removed the data from that. COVID-19 issues do not represent a significant amount of our cases anymore. And our disciplinary record requests don't really deal with current students at all. That is mostly other institutions and future employers doing background checks on our graduates. And it does take up, as you can see from our table here, disciplinary record requests do take up a significant chunk of the cases that we handle. So again, since that's not germane to professors, I've gone ahead and removed those so that we can take a look at just the types of cases that might impact the way that you teach in the classroom or the resources that you offer to students. Now, probably as a surprise to no one, academic issues and issues with faculty members are going to take up the biggest chunk of cases that we see. It's not a surprise because students are spending most of their time in the classroom and they're the type of university representative that they have the most contact with are faculty members. So it's, it's not an indictment against anybody. It's simply a fact that students are going to come to us with cases that are related to the greatest amount of activity that they're doing on campus. We see sorry, that was a notification. We see issues with what I think of as life administration, meaning that students who aren't really sure how to fill out their paperwork for registration correctly, people who get emails from financial aid about things like verification and don't really know what that means. I think it's important that we remember most of our students are first generation, so they are not necessarily going to be able to have a family member that they can ask, what does this email from financial aid mean? What documents are they asking us for? The parents are going to be learning along with the students how to do the paperwork and life administration of being a student outside of the classroom. So that's really what we're seeing here with our registration, financial aid, and bursar holds. Of note is our student hospitalization pie slice. That has actually been going up. Last academic year in 2024-25, I processed 27 hospitalization notices. And those come to me from various hospitals, usually the hospital social workers. So I think that you can see that, we're still greatly being affected by the pandemic. To have 27 students that were not just sick, but hospitalized and able to provide documentation of that, I think is an indication that overall, nobody's doing great and students' health is trending downward. And I'm sure that if HR was giving this presentation, they would see something similar with regard to staff members. So even though you might see a lot of talk about how, the pandemic is over, that does not necessarily mean that the overall health of the community has gone back to where it was. Much like our earlier slide that showed that spike in 2020 and then the rise of cases continued, we are still feeling the after effects of what happened to all of us during the pandemic. So because this is a particular note to this audience here, our faculty members, I did break it down a little bit further, our complaints against faculty members. Most of them fall under the policy that's complaints against faculty members in an academic setting. So for example, a student complaining about a professor's attendance policy, a student complaining that they couldn't turn in work late. And then the other smaller section are the people that are submitting complaints against faculty members that fall under our Office of Compliance and Diversity, having to do with complaints that fall under Title VI or Title IX, things like sexual harassment, harassment or discrimination on the basis of protected class, like race, ethnicity, national origin, or pregnancy or disability. So these are the types of complaints against faculty and members in academic settings that we see in our office most commonly. We see issues with communication. That's the most common one. Simply, I'm trying to get in contact with the professor and having trouble with that. We have the issues around grading. So for example, a student might complain that a professor doesn't turn in graded coursework, so it's hard to know how the student is doing in the class. Or a student may complain that a professor is giving vague feedback or no feedback at all, so they don't really understand, they might be getting low scores on tests and don't really understand how the steps that they need to take to improve. We get some complaints about around syllabi, either not posted by the first day of class, it doesn't necessarily cover all of the info that students need, or if a professor goes off the syllabi a lot, we sometimes get complaints about that. For accommodations, so the term accommodation within kind of the student affairs world refers to issues receiving legal accommodations for disability and or pregnancy. And those accommodations, I'm sure all of you have had an instance where a student has given you a letter from our Office of Accommodations that outlines the disability accommodations that a student is legally supposed to have when they are in your class. However, I have noticed a rise in students using the term accommodation when they're not talking about those legal accommodations that they get from our Office of Accessibility Services. They're using accommodations in a more colloquial term and are asking like, I need an accommodation because a family member died and I missed class. I need an accommodation because my childcare arrangements fell through and I've not been able to complete my coursework because I was watching my kid. I need an accommodation because I was hospitalized and I need to make up late coursework. So be aware that students may be using some of these terms that you hear from me in a slightly different way. So it's good when you're talking with students, if they say the word accommodation, ask a couple of follow-up questions to ensure that they are not asking for something that is covered by the ADA or something that is covered in their accessibility letter. And we also get complaints from students around wellness issues. We see this with students who, for example, are sick and miss class or have a family member that is sick and missed class. Wellness kind of covers a variety of issues. It might be some of those things I was talking about in our true false quiz. Might have something to do with, my internet was cut off. We're about to get evicted, I'm behind on the rent. All of those are wellness things that can affect academic performance. And those are things that a student might be coming to you to say, I'm doing badly because of this and I need accommodations. Again, accommodations not in the legal sense, but accommodations in the sense that something outside of the classroom is affecting their academic performance and they want assistance from the professor in being able to stay in class and get a good grade. And this right here is just all of the protected classes, or most of the protected classes that students might file a complaint against faculty about, which again goes through the Office of Compliance and Diversity and not through the Office of Student Affairs. So I'm just throwing this slide up there. This is also information that you can find on the main CUNY website and on the John Jay website. And it's something that you can, put on your syllabus to cover your bases for ensuring that people know about our equal opportunity and non-discrimination policy. Again, though, I do not have data on that. I do not know how many of these types of complaints against faculty members the Office of Compliance and Diversity gets every year, or how many are resolved, the length of time, or anything like that. But I wanted everybody to know that that is a certain that is a type of complaint that the school fields. Okay. We are about to get into now some very specific suggestions I have for creating a classroom in which, um, everybody feels like a valued member of the community, and in which we can be sensitive to the outside pressures that our students are facing while maintaining the high standards that I'm sure everybody has in order for people to master the coursework in their classes. Before I move on from our raw data and move into suggestions, are there any questions or concerns? Okay, seeing none. I'm assuming that everybody in this chat does have a syllabus. I would recommend that your syllabus include this information right here on this slide, only because this is the type of thing that I see when students come to us and say, I have a complaint. Things like your contact info, your office hours, what your attendance makeup and extra credit policy is if you have one. The contact info is especially important if you are not using the information that's in your online directory slide. So for example, if you're using a different last name than the one that's in your online directory information, that can sometimes trip students up. If you're not using your John Jay, like if you decide that you're gonna, go for a Gmail or for a Proton Mail, or you're using your Yahoo and getting things forwarded from your John Jay account, that should be noted in your syllabus. Not only so that students know the best way to reach you, but also so that if students are getting emails back from you, it's not going into their spam box because it's coming from a non-John Jay email. And also, if you have in your global email address list, if you have initials or something that might make it difficult for a student to just type in your name and find your email address, it should be noted on your syllabus. I say that only because my good friend, Professor Francis Sheehan, is Professor Francis X Sheehan in the global address list. And so when I'm trying to find him, if I forget that X, I'm like, where did Francis go? I would also recommend that you have information about your class discussions and participation policy. This is where you would put information about, for example, participation points, which a lot of professors use and find very helpful, especially when it comes to enforcing appropriate classroom behavior, because you have the ability to add or subtract points if a student's is having behavioral related disruptions in your class that's not necessarily related to how well they're doing in their coursework. We have something in there about that language addressing non-discrimination, especially in the interesting times that we find ourselves in. I think it's really good to have that in there, not just for students, but also for yourself, so that if a student does complain, you can say, look, this was in my syllabus, that this is the way that I am running my class. So it's a lot of this is not just for students, but it's also to cover you in cases where a student might have a spurious complaint about you. And you should also have information on there for how students can find various college policies and resources. It doesn't have to be extensive, even just an email or, the contact info for the Dean of Students office or something like that. Just an indication that there are resources and policies that are not necessarily yours, but connect your class back to the greater class, to the greater college campus environment. Questions or concerns? Okay, now yes?
Hi there, I'm Crystal Cotton. I am an adjunct for ACE program. My class is fully asynchronous, and I have, as a practice, been telling students that if they do not get an email response from me within 24 to 48 hours, that they can text me. My phone number is my business phone number, so not giving the students access to my personal contact information. But I've heard conflicting information. From staff and some folks in HR about that as a standard practice. Do you have insights on that?
Um, Well, first of all, Crystal, I think it's a really good idea that you have on your syllabus, this is how long it takes me to respond. I think that kind of information is the information that students really like, especially toward the end of the semester. When it comes time for grades, I do have to field a lot of questions from students where my response is basically, it's only been 24 hours since your class ended. Give your professor a little bit of time to
Yeah.
get their ducks in a row before they get back to you. It hasn't even been 24 hours and the deadline for grading hasn't passed yet. So I think that having information like that does help students, especially those who maybe are a little bit more high strung, and appreciate knowing, if it's been 24 hours, but your syllabus says 48, it's not time to worry yet.
Right.
So the issue, as I understand it, with giving out your personal cell phone information is that information, if you're using it for work stuff, can be subpoenaed or subject to a freedom of information request.
Mhm.
And if that happens, it's not just the work stuff on your phone that might be caught in that subpoena, it's also all of your personal stuff. So my understanding from my work on with our public safety office is that that is the main concern, those kind of legal issues, and that's why people like the public safety director actually have an entirely separate cell phone that's issued by CUNY so that they can do stuff like text, but it's not on their personal phone. And I'm not here to give legal advice. I know that many professors and staff members do have their personal cell phone numbers that they will give out to their classmates, excuse me, to their coworkers or to students. Um, I mean, if it's worked for you so far, it's fine. I will be happy to give you the information for our
Mhm.
legal counsel if you want to look a little bit more deeply into that, but only to say that I have heard other people use it. You are not the only person. And we can like I said, I'll give you the information for the lawyer if you want to talk to her about it.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. I do have a separate phone, so it's my employer's phone. So anything there they want to take, go ahead.
Yeah, that
Um,
actually sounds fine to me then. Like I said, my main concern is that your personal phone can be subpoenaed, but if it's already not a personal phone and it's been working for you so far, yeah, go for it.
awesome. Thank you.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Anybody else? Okay, so we are now going to move on to a section that I like to call the accessible classroom. So a lot of the information that I'm about to give you either comes from your fellow professors talking to me about things that have and have not worked with ways that they have run their classroom, and some of this is also from students. So one of the pieces of advice that I have heard from professors that gets pretty good reviews is to engage students at the beginning of your class in crafting your community standards and behavioral expectations. And what that means is that, especially for classrooms that are discussion heavy, it's good to ask students, like, what do you think is a respectful way to communicate? What do you think our discussions should look like? How do you want to be treated in the classroom? And one of the beauties of this is that students then do not feel as though they are being given commands from authority figures. They are coming up with a policy that they then feel invested in, and that they will both self-police and help other students self-police and self-regulate because they feel invested in a policy that they helped create. This is like I said, I've heard from several professors that this has worked very well for them. I've recommended it to several professors who then give me a feedback that it did work in curbing some of the behavior that they see from students that is disruptive in the class. Another thing, and I call this the accessible classroom because I think that part of making a classroom that is going to be friendly to people at various stages in their life, like you might be getting people who are coming, who already have kids of their own, who are taking care of elderly or sick family members, people who are already working full-time jobs and working on their careers. You're going to be able to help them find at the beginning of class common ground and behavioral expectations with, a 17-year-old who has just graduated from college and, got their very first smartphone as a present as at their graduation, and maybe doesn't yet know that you can't text your fellow class members about salacious things. When we think about an accessible classroom, what we're trying to do is meet the broadest number of students where they're at. And because we can't read people's minds and we don't know where students are at, it's important to engage students and ask them, where are you at? What are the resources that you need? And show that you are receptive to those suggestions by incorporating them into your classroom, especially with students who have disabilities that are on the record and they have their letters from accessibility services. We have to remember that there are going to be a lot of students who might have disabilities that entitle them to the protections and they don't know it. Very famously, our current mayor was dyslexic and never received a diagnosis, and did affect him going through school. Same for things when people are adults. It's very difficult to get insurance to cover something like screening for autism when you're no longer a child. So being that, oh, and because of the pandemic, there are probably a lot of people walking around with long COVID who have absolutely no idea that they have it, have no way of getting diagnosed because there isn't really any, single blood test that you can take for that. And they may need accommodations, but they don't even know it themselves. And therefore, when we solicit their input, we get students in the mindset of thinking not what's everybody else doing? How do I be normal? We get students thinking, what do I personally need? What is the environment that I personally can create for myself, both in the classroom and at home, that's going to help me succeed? We're engaging the kind of critical thought process of their own selves by framing it within the community of the classroom. And part of that is going to be transparency and regular feedback. So, for example, what Crystal was just talking about with having her standard response time on her syllabus, those types of transparency are not only good for somebody who, for example, has to work around doctor's appointments and therefore needs a lot of information at the beginning of the semester so that they can set their schedule, but also people who, again, may have an anxiety disorder that they're not aware of, and knowing that after 24 hours, Crystal hasn't gotten back to them, they don't need to worry yet because Crystal has already made clear that you got to wait 48 hours for a response, and that's the standard response time. I also recommend regular feedback in the sense that, like, for example, if you are the type of professor who privately tells students before the deadline to drop the class with the W, hey, you should consider dropping because you're failing the class and there's not a path for you to pass. If you're that type of professor, say it at the beginning of class. Say, if you're not doing well at this time of the semester, I will be approaching you and giving your options. Same for if you are already on Navigate and you're using Navigate to flag students who may be struggling academically. Tell students at the beginning of class that they will be receiving those flags and what the process is when they receive it. I think that this is really going to cut down on the amount of students then who feel panicky when it happens to them, because at least if they know it's coming, they can kind of be ready for it. And especially if you have a set path for students, like when I approach you, when you get this flag, these are the steps you need to take, A, B, C. That's the sort of thing that can really help students, again, self-regulate and know, the transparency and the regular feedback is going to cut down on anxiety, and it's going to give them the tools that they need to solve their own problems. Again, you're engaging their critical thought, you're letting them know it's going to happen, you give them some steps afterwards so that in the future, if they're working with a professor who maybe didn't put those on there, and then they get the flag through Navigate, they're like, I remember this. I remember that I need to talk to this person and this person and this person, and that these are the issues that might happen if I drop this class rather than wait and see if I can muster a passing grade. A lot of this stuff falls under what we call in the social model of disability, the curb cut effect. This means a curb cut, for those who don't know, is when you're on the sidewalk and you're about to cross the street, there's that flattened part that's level with the street. It was initially put in so that people with mobility issues who are in wheelchairs can get around in public. They can use the city streets just like anybody else. However, urban planners found that when they put in curb cuts, it wasn't only disabled people in wheelchairs that used them. It was parents with strollers. It was shoppers with their little shopping carts, or people delivering laundry, people making deliveries to bodegas. The curb cut effect is seen in a lot of different areas of our public life. Even the development of texting on cell phones, it was initially just something that they were going to offer to people who were deaf and hard of hearing. But one of the people behind developing it said, I would like to have this for late nights when I'm up with my baby and I don't want to talk on the phone because it'll wake him up. So the curb cut effect refers to these kind of this widespread positive effects that we can see when we make society accessible for one group. It becomes accessible to a whole bunch of other people that maybe didn't even realize that they needed this. For example, I see a lot of students who have accessibility letters and they want to see the syllabus before they even register for a class. So if you're the type of person who puts up your syllabus well in advance of the first day of class, it's not only going to benefit people with, again, those legal accommodations, it's also going to benefit, again, somebody who has a full-time job, somebody who has childcare arrangements that they need to make, somebody who would prefer like a reading heavy and writing heavy class as opposed to a pop quiz and exam heavy class, because they know that's where they shine, that maybe they get test anxiety that isn't severe enough to be counted as a disability, but they would prefer to have a class that doesn't place as much emphasis on tests. And those are the types of accommodations that when you make them for our disabled students, it benefits so many more other students. And maybe they didn't even know that that was something that they needed until it was something that that was offered to them. And this applies to you as well. I had a professor at a conference tell me that they are hard of hearing and that the ticking of people typing on laptops makes it hard for them to teach. So what they did in their classroom is they said, this section of seats right up here, close to where I teach, is a no laptop zone. And you can use laptops in other parts of the classrooms. And you can notice there that the professor didn't divulge that they were disabled. You can also probably know that in addition to the professor not having to be distracted by laptops, other students who maybe don't want to be distracted by laptops can also sit in that area. If anybody takes the Amtrak, you know the concept of the quiet car. So that's the designated car. You don't need any particular reason if you want to sit in the quiet car. You don't have to divulge any disability. The fact that it exists, though, is going to benefit a wide range of people who, for whatever reason, need that quiet. So it's those types of things that you can think about for your classroom that are not just going to benefit students, but also benefit you as a professor. Okay. More about the accessible classroom. I think it's really important to note that a lot of our students are going to be coming from zero tolerance learning environments, meaning that there is no room for failure, that even one infraction of the classroom will get you sent out for the rest of the day. Suspensions are given out very freely, that students are not given a lot of room to fail and make mistakes. Or if they do fail and make mistakes, somebody in a position of authority uses that mistake to belittle them. This is something that you might see in their home life too, that there is not necessarily an environment where people feel that they can be wrong or change their minds or make mistakes because somebody else in their family is going to tease them for it, denigrate them for it, bring it up every other time that they make a mistake. And this in turn leads to an atmosphere of shame and avoidance around making mistakes. And students might get defensive if they're accused of doing something wrong because for them the stakes are very, very high. That when there's no room for you to make mistakes, what you tend to do is then hide. Shame is really good for making somebody not want to do something, but it's not very good for building up good habits. So within your classroom, I would encourage you to adopt and encourage an environment where you're reducing and unlearning shame. Like, for example, I would not recommend calling students names or doing ad hominem criticisms, like telling them that their reading levels are low even for a New York public school graduate. Universally disliked by all of the students who complain about this. I have never heard somebody who has said that being called a loser or an idiot or stupid has made them want to be a better person or made them feel more invested in their academic careers. I would encourage the acknowledgement of effort, hard work, and small improvements. Don't just praise somebody who gets 100 on a test. Somebody who got 45 on a test and managed to get it up to 56 also deserves praise and acknowledgement for hard work and small improvements. This is also part of emphasizing and reinforcing the specific behaviors and actions that you want to see. Students really need to feel that they can try and fail and then try again. And part of that is we're trying to separate the idea that a student's failure in a classroom means their failure as a person. Again, when we're emphasizing specific behaviors and actions you want to see, that might take the form of, for example, saying to a student, you have missed the last 3 homework assignments and it's affecting your grade, as opposed to saying something like, you don't seem invested in this class anymore. Well, you started out well in the class, but it seems you've gotten a little lazy. Or even something like, don't send me emails like that at midnight. It's so unprofessional. You can, instead of saying that something's unprofessional, for example, you could say, I do not respond to emails after 5 p.m. Again, something you might want to put in your syllabus. I do not respond to emails on the weekends. That was why I didn't get back to you. Again, you're not trying to cast aspersions on the type of person that they are. You are naming and recognizing behavior that you want to see and reinforcing it with acknowledgement of people who are working hard and putting in the effort. This is especially important for people who, again, maybe if you're dyslexic and it was never addressed when you were young, you're going to be coming in with a lot of shame around the fact that maybe you don't read as well as other people. And when you do, improve from a C to a B minus, you want somebody to say, I could tell that you have worked very hard on this, as opposed to, well, it's about time you've learned how to read. Again, no students has reported to me that teasing or name calling or to quote Pink Floyd, dark sarcasm in the classroom has really helped them with issues that they have been having with their academic career. We want to give the message that hard work matters, that coming back and trying again after a mistake matters, and that even if you have to have somebody leave the classroom because they're causing a disruption, that they are still a member of your class and that you look forward to seeing them next time. I would really encourage you, both for yourself and for your students, to have a classroom environment where it's okay for people to change their mind about something you previously agreed to. This is for you as much as it is for your students. Maybe you were fine taking late assignments and giving extra credit until the middle of the semester when suddenly your parent got sick, and now you don't have time to give extra credit or to take late assignments. It's okay for you to change your syllabus in the middle of the semester and say, this wasn't working. I'm going to have to say now that I'm not going to give extra credit. If this is a problem for you, you can come to me privately. Related to that, please push the message that it's okay to try something different if the first or second or the third tactic doesn't work. So for example, if somebody is having trouble and they go to a tutor on campus and it doesn't work, you can encourage them to be like, okay, well, what about the tutoring didn't work? Was it the person that you were with? Is there another issue that's going on? Are you going in the morning when you're really, really sleepy, when you should be going in the afternoon? Things like that. Again, we're trying to encourage students critical thought and making them think about the environment that they best thrive in so that they can make those choices and decisions for themselves. And again, in the zero tolerance environments that students might be coming from, they have not been given space to try different tactics. If they do something and it's wrong, then they're punished for it and shamed for it, and they're not taught you can try something different. You can change your minds. It doesn't have to be this way. It's just either you succeeded or you failed, and there's nothing else. I think it's okay for students to say that they don't understand, especially when it comes to things like the example I gave earlier. If you tell someone your email was not professional, a student should feel free to come back and say, I don't understand what that means. What's an example of a professional email? Without being told, again, in zero tolerance environments, sometimes saying, I don't understand or I'm confused is denigrated as a quote unquote excuse. Oh, you're just making excuses. You're being deliberately obtuse. Try and cultivate an environment in which if somebody says, I don't understand what's happening, you interpret that in good faith and say, okay, let's get into this a little bit deeper. Let's unpack that. Let's unpack this. What about this do you not understand? I want to help you understand because it's more important for me that you grasp what I'm saying than it is for you to simply obey me or get it right on the first time. And part of that is, the ability to ask for clarification and feedback without being shamed for not automatically knowing is really important. I put this under the accessible classroom because I think all of us can understand that maybe somebody who has an official diagnosis of autism or ADHD is going to need extra time on tests. They are also going to need extra time on any types of instructions, being able to say, I don't understand and not be punished for it is beneficial not only to people who are genuinely going to have different processing speeds and different thought patterns than quote unquote normal students. These are also things that benefit literally all students, and these are all skills that students are going to need to have as they go into their future. Okay, I see that we're running up a little bit on time. That's okay. I have just a couple more slides, and then I will open us up for the Q&A. So we're going to reach out a little bit now beyond just the classroom. We're going to think about the other slices of that pie chart. So not the academic issues and issues with faculty members. Now we're going to think about all of the other stuff that students have issues with, their health and wellness, their finances, um, their ability to do the paperwork that they need to do in order to get their financial aid or their Medicaid and stuff like that. So really normalize in your classroom asking for help and utilizing campus resources. So again, if you're the type of professor who is using Navigate to flag students who are having issues academically, also try and be the type of professor who early and often tells people how to get help outside of the classroom. One professor told me that they sometimes give assignments that reward knowledge about campus resources. For example, oh, you want some extra credit? Well, you can go to an athletics game. Or, oh, you're interested in being a social worker? Have you considered any of the affinity groups or support groups on campus where you can go and talk with the professionals that are running those? What I would like to see is students um, recognizing that their student activity fee, which pays for the fun things like commencement and athletics and recreation, is also paying for services that have a lot of stigma around them. So when you talk about athletics games and tutoring and psychiatric care in the same kind of matter-of-fact, non-judgmental way, it does help students destigmatize that for themselves. And it does help them be more free with utilizing those campus resources. This can be difficult for students who I see a lot. It's very sad, but they are coming from home environments where mental health is considered fake where medication for your issues is very frowned upon. Again, can be a lot of shame around something that's perceived as laziness or failure. And if you as the professor normalize it by talking about those types of things as if they are no different in terms of the student experience from the athletic games or club involvement or student government involvement, it will help them access those resources both on their own and if it's something that you suggest. Again, we really want to help students unlearn that shame they get from not being quote unquote normal, from needing more help, from not understanding things as quickly as other students, from, maybe knowing in their hearts that they do have a disability, but having no ability to get diagnosed and not being able to talk about it within their family because those are simply not things that are talked about in their family or their culture. You can show them that there is a different culture, one that considers asking for mental health resources or going to tutoring regularly as much a part of the normal student experience as anything else that they do on campus. Okay, so that was the halfway point of my presentation. The stuff that comes up next is a presentation that I give pretty often at Faculty Development Day that's about student conduct and discipline, but I do see that we're at time and I want to give a lot of room for any question and answer sections. So I have made here a nice word cloud of all of the things that students have come to the Dean of Students office with. Again, surprising exactly no one, the stuff that has to do with academics, we see the most often. And then the smaller words are things that we still see pretty often, but they're on those smaller slices of the pie chart. How are we doing, Karen?
We're doing great. We have 9 more minutes, Rachel.
Fabulous. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen and turn my camera back on, and I will open up the floor now to any questions or concerns that anybody may have. Doesn't necessarily have to be about my presentation, can be about other things that professors might want to know about enrollment management and student affairs before the semester starts. But take it away. You can raise your hand, you can just unmute yourself and start talking. Does anybody have suggestions that they didn't see mentioned in my presentation that they think would help their colleagues? I'm also open to new information. I love getting new information from professors about things that they have tried that work and that don't work. I'm sure you can imagine as the student conduct officer, I am usually not seeing students when they're in their normal, classroom environments. You'll have much more contact with students and have closer relationships with them than I may necessarily have. So if there are things that you're seeing in your classroom that, again, I didn't bring up, I would love to hear it.
Thank you, Rachel. Can I just plug the library as always?
Yes!
You mentioned rewards for for connecting with different student services on campus. Please also send your students to the library. Speak to us, second floor of the library. We have librarians, they can get research help. Just stop by, say hello. We are having tours as well. If you go to our website, we have virtual tours coming up for the weeks of welcome, as well as on-site tours.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Karen. I would be remiss not mentioning that the library has many wonderful resources for students, faculty, and staff. And thank you very much for all of the work that you do.
Thank you.
Hi, Rachel. So I have a question. So first of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I just have a question about, I'm a coordinator and I often have students coming to me kind of complaining about a faculty member from the course, from the program. So I was just wondering if you have any suggestions of kind of what the role as coordinator should be in case of student complaints.
Sure. So for complaints against faculty members in an academic setting, which is, as I said earlier, the majority of complaints that our office gets, I imagine it's the same for you. The policy says that if you cannot resolve the issue informally with the professor, your next step is to go to the department chairperson to file a complaint. And if your professor is themselves the chairperson of the department, you can go to the office of the provost. So that would be my recommendation. I'm not involved in any of the investigations that handle faculty and staff, so I couldn't tell you, necessarily what happens after a complaint has been put in. That would be a question for your chairperson. I imagine that all of them probably have a slightly different procedure for taking those complaints and getting the investigation going. But if you're just giving information out to students, you can give them the contact information for the chair. I have a standard email response that has like a brief description of the policy, as well as a link to the full policy if students want to read that on their own. But in short, that complaints go to the chairperson, unless it's something like I'm being sexually harassed or I'm being discriminated against, in which case it goes to the Office of Compliance and Diversity. And I'm going to drop in the chat their main email, just so that everybody has that, because they also investigate complaints from staff and faculty members who may feel that they have been the victim of discrimination or sex-based misconduct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was told that for the counseling services that it can go on students' record, and that could be something discouraging students because they don't want to have some type of psychological counseling on their record. And so are there any mental health resources that students could go to that they wouldn't have to worry that it could be something on their record? Is that something that I'm just incorrect about? But I had
No,
been
you
told
are
by multiple people that is a consideration that students should be aware of.
So the short answer is yes. If you'll recall from the first pie chart I showed you with the disciplinary record requests, some law enforcement agencies or federal agencies will ask for psychological records from the school, but not all of them do. And because I'm kind of in the mode that it's better for students to ask for help than not, I think that when you're making the suggestion, you can tell them that just going to the counseling center and asking what services are there is not going to go on their record. It may go on their record if they decide to get medication through a psychiatrist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just going into the counseling center or going to a support group is something that's going to be on their record. And it's important to note that getting into regular treatment of the type that would be suggested, there are many steps that the student has to take, at which point they can always drop out if it becomes apparent that it's going to be on their record. So it's not something that's going to be sprung on them as a surprise.
So if they go at the very beginning and have like some just discussions, that's not on their record, but only if they get medication.
Or if they go into treatments. This is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse because it gets into things like HIPAA and the oaths that our healthcare providers take, but it's not going to be on a student's record just to go to the wellness center and ask questions, and even to front load it with I'm interested in services, but I don't want anything on my record because I don't want it to be reported to future employers. What can you suggest?
Okay, so they could go in with that. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. They can always go in and inquire and say, hey, is this for me? And that will not be on their record. And as I say, even if they do sit in a private room and talk with the counselor for a session just to talk about the issues that they're having, that's not necessarily going to go on their record. And at any point, they can say, hey, to the counselor, hey, let me know if we're starting to get to the point where this is going to be reported. I can't have any of this on my record. So the counselor knows then to only keep it to stuff that are not reported, or to terminate the meeting and say, okay, well, we've reached that point. So, here are the resources that we have on campus that won't be reported. Like, for example, if you attend a Guy Code or a Sista Circle or the LGBTQ support circle, those things are not going to be reported.
Okay.
And
you.
I see from our Career Center, thank you, Julie, the FBI or any government agency will receive those records as a partner of a background check. Yes, thank you. She is correct that the especially the federal jobs, they do tend to ask more pointed questions. Some of the other law enforcement agencies, or for example, the bar, like I know that the states of Maryland and Florida do background checks for students sitting the bar, but as far as I know, they're only asking for disciplinary records and not psychological ones. Great question though, Kathy. Thank you. Okay, well, everybody, thank you very much for attending my session. I am dropping my personal phone number and my email into the chat here. So if anybody wants to reach out to me directly at any time during the semester, please feel free to do so. I am on campus Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and remote on Mondays and Tuesdays during the semester.